We're in this bid war with our competitors. And what we spent last year on Google and Facebook, if we spend the same amount this year, we're going to get fewer number of clicks or visitors because rates are always going up. They got to make more money. So the place to go is more up funnel, build awareness to drive people down so that when they're there, they're like, oh, I know who those guys are. I want to buy from them. And so it's a lot of confusion in the marketplace, especially for marketers where they're like, I see my competitors spending money on TV ads, but I tried that and it didn't work. They must be wasting money. But after 4 or 5 months of watching these ads, you start to say to yourself, I wonder if they know something I don't. And the truth is they do. They know they're actually working.
They said getting started was the hardest part, but no one told you how hard it is to scale a custom service business. It's time for your team to step up, but your clients want you. Discover how to scale to 7 figures and beyond by freeing up time and getting your team to run whole parts of the company so you can focus on scaling profits. This is the Hands Off CEO with Mandi Ellefson.
All right, today I have Jeff Greenfield on the line on the show. Jeff, thank you so much for being here live with me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Mandi. Excited to chat about my favorite subjects.
Well, Jeff and I got connected over LinkedIn. I was reading some of his comments, and they were so thought-provoking. And I thought, I've got to connect with this guy. So we've had a chance to have some really interesting conversations and his perspective on where the industry is moving with professional services, with marketing metrics, and it's phenomenal, his perspectives on this. So he is the CEO and founder of Provalytics. I said that right, Jeff?
You did, Mandi. Awesome.
So why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Jeff Greenfield, CEO, founder of Provalytics. And Provalytics is a marketing measurement platform. It's the whole idea, we've all heard it as marketers, half the money I spend in advertising is wasted. The only problem is I don't know which half. And Provalytics solves for that in terms of how things should be divvied up, but it's also a predictive algorithm. So it actually looks forward as well and provides recommendations on where to spend. It validates the whole thing. And I've been in this space since 2007. I created one of the first multi-touch attribution platforms called C3 Metrics, scaled up that company and exited there about a year before the pandemic, thinking I would never come back to measurement. And then with the pandemic, the bottom dropped out and the entire advertising ecosystem shifted to a privacy-focused one, which meant that all of the measurement I had built before was no longer going to function. So we've brought to market something that is essentially future-proofed, will continue to work, and answers those big questions about what's actually working, especially if it's not click-based. And how do you connect what used to be called branding to performance, and how can you actually prove CTV is actually driving revenue into the bank and things like that. So it's pretty cool. It also incorporates all of retail media. It can look across and it can actually tell you how marketing is impacting sales actually in brick and mortar as well too. So it's very, very cool stuff. Very cool.
I love this. So one of the things that I'm hearing is that the work that you're doing is actually taking these two silos that has historically been marketing and sales and putting them together so you can see the whole big picture.
Right. That's exactly what it is. I mean, because the reality is for most marketers today in corporate America, you're actually being held responsible for sales. Even though your job, when you think about it, if you go back to the idea of a business where you have a website and you sell stuff on a website, the marketer's job is to get qualified people to the website. The website's job is to then merchandise and sell. Marketing should not actually be held responsible for sales, but typically that merchandising and the performance of the website all falls under marketing. So at the end of the day, you're being held responsible for actual dollars in the bank. And so you need to be able to look at it. And the problem, though, with the way things are from a measurement perspective is that since everyone uses GA4, Google Analytics 4, and which is all click-based, we end up as marketers shifting our spend down to the bottom of the funnel. And so as a result, we're in this bid war with our competitors. And what we spent last year on Google and Facebook, if we spend the same amount this year, we're going to get fewer number of clicks or visitors because rates are always going up. They got to make more money. So the place to go is more up funnel, build awareness to drive people down so that when they're there, they're like, oh, I know who those guys are. I want to buy from them. And so it's a lot of confusion in the marketplace, especially for marketers where they're like, I see my competitors spending money on TV ads, but I tried that and it didn't work. They must be wasting money. But after 4 or 5 months of watching these ads, you start to say to yourself, I wonder if they know something I don't. And the truth is they do. They know they're actually working.
Wow. So this is something that I am hearing from brand marketers and any of the companies that they struggle to show their value because what they can theoretically say, yes, this should do this, but especially with so much change in the economy and global politics, there's a lot of changes. AI, you add on top of that, and we live in a world of a great amount of uncertainty. So it sounds to me like the tool that you have really helps combat that fear that brands have in investing.
Oh, it certainly does. Because, and for one thing, and most important, is that the person's job in the organization who decides how much money you get to spend is finance, the CFO, if you will. And you need to actually believe in your numbers yourself, but then you need to convince the finance team that your numbers are actually accurate. And there's this kind of belief in the finance circles that marketers don't know how to add properly because their numbers never add up, because most marketers will take numbers out of the different platforms and say, this is what I've got. And it doesn't match total sales, or the numbers higher than what total sales are. And the reality is, us marketers, we know how to add. We're using Excel. Excel is easy. But what marketers forget is that finance and CFOs, they do something called financial modeling. And so I want marketers who are listening to think about that word modeling. That's a financial model. So finance folks are used to this concept of creating these kind of predictive models to run a business. And when you show up just pulling data from platforms that don't add up, they look at the marketing function as someone we're going to take money from them. The reality is when you come in and you explain to them that you actually now have a marketing model that's running and you can demonstrate the predictive aspects of it, and that every time it runs, it actually self-validates, and you can show it things like the R-square and the MAPE, which, believe me, everyone in the finance office know what those things are. Those are statistical things that talk about the predictive capability and the error range of the model. And you show them these things, they're like, okay, you're riding a horse that I can believe in. So the person you have to get the trust in is finance. That's really the key to unlocking those dollars.
That is a really good point here, and you have to get finance to unlock those dollars, but you're also dealing with people that are some of the most skeptical human beings on the planet.
You're right about that.
Right. They're swallow a piece of granite and you're gonna have diamonds come out, right? They're really.
But you can't blame them for. You can't blame them for being skeptical when you've seen some of the reports that marketers have sent into finance. No wonder finance keeps cutting marketing, because we can't prove what we're doing. And I mean, the simplest way to kind of explain this from a click basis, if we were to kind of step back, let's say you've created some new garden hose, Mandi. This garden hose is absolutely unbelievable. It doesn't leak. It's fantastic. And you film this really cool video with it, and you start running ads on Facebook for it. And then you run ads on Google, so when people search for the name, they'll actually see it. So what happens, let's say I come along and I'm scrolling through my Facebook feed and I see the video, I stop, but I don't watch it, and I keep scrolling. But now you've built awareness. You've gotten my attention. So I've got a little bit of awareness of it. 2 or 3 days later, I'm going in Instagram, I'm scrolling along, I see the same video, now I stop and watch it. And now I say, this is really cool. When my hose starts to leak, this is gonna be the one I get. And then a month later, I'm out on the weekend turn on the hose and it leaks like crazy. And I'm like, oh my God, what was the name of that thing? I pull my phone out, I Google it, I search for it, and then I buy it. So in GA4, my purchase is going to show up as coming from Google, not from that original Facebook and the Instagram post. Multiply that by 1,000 times over the month. And if you're a smart data-driven marketer, you're going to stop spending on Facebook and Instagram, or at least cut your spend. You're going to move it over to Google. And guess what? When you do that, you're not going to notice a difference for about a month or two, because that journey takes time. And so this is the problem today, is it's not marketers that we're not smart. We're data driven. We're just following a set of numbers that are very wrong. I mean, that's really the best way to look at it. They're very wrong. And they don't tell a complete picture.
Right. Right. Well, it's really important to be able to actually make good decisions using data. And I'd love to hear when you're looking at your measurement platform, what size of companies is this good for? Like, what is like the minimum spend or minimum size companies that would benefit from the way your approach is here?
Well, the approach that I'm talking about would work with any marketer, even if you're only spending a couple $100 a month. Our company focuses on enterprise marketers that are spending 10 million or more per year. Some of our clients are spending upwards of several $100 million or more per year. But we, as a company, we focused in on the enterprise space because that's what I built my previous company on, and that's what we wanted to focus on. But the fundamentals that we utilize, a small marketer could DIY it themselves.
Got it. And when you say DIY, what kind of tools would they need to be able to put these things together?
They would use the exact same tools they're using now. They would actually just increase, they would add an additional column. And what I mean by that is that the way most marketers look at things is that they download data from GA4, they put it in a Google sheet, they download their data from Facebook, and they download their data from Google and wherever else. And then they look at their clicks per day, they look at what they spent per day, and they calculate their cost per click and their cost per sale. And now, so then you look at, as a smart marketer, you say, okay, what sent me the most number of clicks? And they spend more there. So in that example of the hose, Google sent the most number of clicks, so they would spend more money in Google. So that's being data driven. What I'm recommending and what our approach looks at is that when you download these reports from the platforms, there's actually a column there that indicates attention and awareness. In fact, there's a good chance when you download it, you're just ignoring it. And that column is impressions. And impressions are essentially how many ads were shown every day. Now, people may say, oh, we're going to talk about view throughs and things like that. And it's like, no, we're not going to talk about that. What we're going to talk about is that before there ever was digital advertising, the largest brands in the world, the way they measured and built their brands was by looking at how many ads were shown every week in every market. And that's how they determine what was working and what was not working. And so if you download all of these impressions and now you pan the camera back, and instead of looking at how many clicks there were per day, look at how many impressions there were each day and graph it, overlay with the number of impressions by day, the number of clicks, and the number of sales by day. And what you're going to see is the days you had a lot of clicks, you didn't necessarily have a lot of impressions. You may have to go back a couple of days or even a week or two before. And you want to dig in on those days where you see a correlation between lots of impressions and then later on lots of clicks, and then dig into that day to figure out what campaigns were the ones that were driving it and spend more there. So step away from the click, because that's going to lead you in the wrong direction. You want to focus on the ads, because the ads are what change behavior. The changed behavior is the click. You want to focus on changing the behavior. That's the idea behind advertising and marketing.
Yeah. I like that, and that's a really simple little tweak that people can take on that. And I think that's really smart. One of the things that I've noticed with service-based firms, marketing agencies, that we're talking about here specifically, is that there's a real problem that they run into when they are, making a pitch, which would include, data services. It should, but what they run into is that their sales process starts to fall apart when they are talking with the prospect, and the prospect is like, well, we're going to give you this money, and what we're going to get out as a result of it. And and depending on the different brands, some of them will ask that, and some of them will just be thinking of it. They'll look at the slides, they'll look at the fancy presentation, and they'll notice an absence of answering that very one most important question. Almost none of them ask that question, and what they hope is that they're going to be able to add enough flashiness and beautiful design products and all of those different things that show their work product, that they can glaze over the most important question that they should be asking is that we give you this money over a year, what is the business going to look like? What's the
Right.
outcome from that?
Right. That you nailed it in terms of what prospects are actually thinking. It's very easy for an agency to come in and do an audit and show the things that the current agency is doing wrong.
Right.
But the reality is, okay, well, once you take over and you're doing things right, what are we actually going to get out of it, and what should we be able to get out of it? And any agency that's smart will answer that, and hopefully has enough experience to use some benchmarks for that. But what I see is agencies coming in and not being able to differentiate themselves. Marketers hire agencies because they anticipate and they expect that you've got a better way of doing things. And what I've seen that's been winning pitches is when marketers come in and say, listen, anyone can buy your media, but what we're going to do different is we have a GPS that's going to guide us. And because the truth is, we don't know, and our platform doesn't know what's going to happen in the world a month or two from now or 3 months from now. We don't know if there's going to be more tariffs. Nobody knows. So what you want a platform that is always going to be up and running, that's going to tell you how to bob and weave and be able to navigate things, the world. Things are less predictable now than they ever were, primarily because you have to be advertising in more places than you ever were before. Things are very tough out there for marketers, depending upon who. It used to be that if you were a large brand, you would just buy different TV shows. Maybe have different creative. You could be on Love Boat for one demographic and Brady Bunch for another one back in the day. Now, if you want to target people that are under 30, you have to be on TikTok. And if you want to be 45 plus, well, they're not on TikTok. You need to be on Instagram and Facebook. Two totally different platforms, two totally different levels of expertise. You measure them completely differently as well, too. So the world has become very, very difficult for marketers. So having a platform like this in place, or something that uniquely makes you stand out and say, hey, we're different and here's why.
Right. And that's a great example of one way that you can differentiate. And when we were talking about that question that very few agencies actually can answer, which is why they're agencies. And because agencies, they come in and they're selling activity, and the activity may or may not work. But the true growth partners are the ones who can come in and say, these are the problems that we're seeing that you're having right here. This is how we'll solve these problems, and this is what we foresee as an outcome based upon these benchmarks, reaching them. And oh, by the way, we have 5 case studies that we have shown of companies being able to get to this outcome from it. This is the future business state. Do you want this? That's a growth partner. That's not an agency anymore. They might do some agency services, but it puts them in a completely different category. And now they're completely differentiated. Is that, would you put that in the category of differentiated?
Oh, 1,000%, because media is only one aspect of issues in terms of brands growing. There's so many barriers along the way. There's everything from the website going down on a frequent basis so people can't buy, the landing page just being absolutely horrible from a conversion rate standpoint of view, to lousy creative and messaging that's completely completely off. There's so many different things that brands tend to forget, or just people tend to, especially the larger the organization, they tend to just do what was done previously and they don't think about it. But what we've found throughout the years, you can't spend your way out of problems, because what ends up happening is that you're rowing a boat and the hole just gets bigger and bigger. You keep throwing money at it, you're still going to be sinking. So when someone shows up as a true partner, they look to solve problems and kind of fix that hole at the same time while they're managing the spend as well, or maybe devoting some of that budget towards fixing that hole. That's always the better solution, without a doubt. And that makes you less of an agency. You're not an agency anymore. You're, like you said, you're a growth partner, and you're invaluable to them. And that definitely decreases your chance of churning the client. And the truth is, once you start digging in to fixing problems, there is the larger the brand, the number of problems that innovative, smart people, there's just unlimited numbers of problems that can be fixed.
Right. Well, you know what? One of the things that I see with this is, like, when you're elevating to this point, and one of the reasons I actually wanted this conversation with you here is that the work that you're doing and the mindset that you're talking about with approach to providing the proof, showing this is the efficacy of the work that we're actually providing, that's required if you want to be at that level. Because how else are you going to be able to say this is what we see work right now? This is what's working across our other brands, and based upon that, I see that if we added this, and based upon this, then we can generate this kind of result. And that's what top level experts in your field do. But it's really what I see the best, most successful companies are doing is they're becoming an expert in their clients' businesses. They're not an expert in their own business. Like, I'm an expert SEO person, or I'm an expert branding person, versus I am an expert for direct to consumer brands that are scaling to 100 million. Very different, right?
Totally different. And the truth is that, when you're inside of a business, you start to think that, oh, my business is different than any other business. And that's kind of a fallacy. Yes, there are some businesses that are regulated, like the pharmaceutical industry and finance. There are some corners that you have to make sure you dot the I's and cross the T's and all of those things. But at the end of the day, fundamentals of any business are always the same. There's some nuances that are there. But if you're smart and you're innovative and you have the proper type of training and understanding, and you step back, you kind of pan the camera back and look at the bigger picture, some of these stand out just like a sore thumb. They're very easy to spot, and they become major blockers for actually any potential growth. And they're the types of things that when you identify and you shine light on them, clients are like, oh my God, I thought that could be an issue, but now that you're showing that to me, we definitely need to get that corrected and fixed.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I like what you said about, there's the same components across all businesses, right? But there's the nuances, and the nuances to each company, that's where the niching can happen and differentiation happens. It's in the nuance of it. And unfortunately, too many companies are generalists, and the reason why is because they have over-relied on inbound work from referrals. And I don't blame them, because that's referrals. We continually look back at our data, and the most work comes from referrals in our network, and that's just how that happens, right? And that's a good thing. It means that you're actually doing something right. But also, if you're doing that as a way to be able to please everyone and have your website be general enough, your LinkedIn general enough so that I'm not going to turn anybody off, what you're doing is you're just not being irresistible. And it's in that nuance is what we have found is where you can specialize. And I would just give you an example on this. One of our clients, they already had an industry that they specialized in really boring utility space. The biggest challenge is that their sales are, they have have really long sales cycles. So the clients are quite reluctant to go and make investments because they don't know if it's going to work or not, right? We're talking about a 3 to 5 year sales cycle, but that's the very issue to solve. So when she started changing the way that her company positioned and around the nuance of that problem and looked at the outcome, then they went from charging $5,000 a month and having 3-month engagements to charging $150,000 a month for $150,000 for 6-month engagement, and then renewing that for multiple year engagements. So you're looking at something that could become a 7-figure engagement eventually, versus what's just barely enough to be able to actually just get the work done, but not even enough to be able to pay for all the extra staff you need to actually run a real firm. So that's what I'm seeing in the nuance.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you say that. I was talking with a friend a number of months ago, and he's got an agency, and all of a sudden he picked up a service-based business, and then he picked up another one, and both of them were exterminators. And what ended up happening is that over the course of several months, he learned all of the nuances and the terminology. And then he got another referral, and he thought, I think there's a there, and updated his website to be specific and decided to specialize just in exterminators because he found that they were great clients to deal with, and he knew it now inside and out. So I think there's something to be said about going in on a particular sector of business, especially when you think about something like a service-based business, because there's tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands exterminators all over the US. So it's a large enough market to where there's more than enough business there, without a doubt.
And I'm also seeing, there's another example we have. Jerry, he had a lot of different niches, across probably a dozen different niches they were doing their work under, and getting paid anywhere from small $1,000 type of we'll do this for you, do that, the bits and bobs types of thing. Then, and of course they had some 5-figure deals on the top of that too, but they reworked their positioning and who they were actually doing work with, similar type of work actually, but in the elder care space, and they then repackaged it to have 6-figure engagements and up to 7-figure engagements. But what that does is it allows you to actually do the real work.
Right.
Because the little tiny projects, you just can't do the real work. And, to your point earlier about being held accountable to real results, you cannot deliver real results when they're asking you to put together brochures or run this campaign or run that one, but not holistically as a strategy. And one of the things that has made I have noticed as his company has scaled, they were at $1 million when we started with them, then scaled to $3 million and tripled profits while doing that. Now they're on track for $10 million. But they've built an entire category, and what this has done is it's allowed them to be able to have channel partners that send them work. It's allowed them to build a whole podcast and a platform that brings in clients that they can be able to generate lots of assets, and then even build proprietary tools that can be whole spin-off businesses that are way more scalable than this. We're seeing that predictably from companies. So it really goes far beyond this agency model where you're actually really being a specialist for the company.
Well, and what it comes down to when you start to think about it is that if I broke my ankle or I broke my hand, let's say, and my thumb was in bad shape, am I just going to have a regular doctor operate on my hand, or do I want a hand specialist? I want the best hand specialist that there is that's available. So, as humans, we this is the type of things we want. We want the expert, we want the specialist. And so, from a service perspective, from an agency perspective, the generalist approach, I don't see it working anymore. I definitely don't see it. I'll give you a great example is that what most people don't know is that the #1 TV network in the US right now is YouTube. It is. And it's been that way for the better part of 2025 forward. And so what's interesting about YouTube is the way you buy YouTube is you buy it through Google Ads, just like you do search and retargeting and the shopping listings and things like that. So companies that are, Google SEM agencies are now buying YouTube. But what we've seen on our side is the performance just sucks because the person who's buying it is coming from the attitude of search. They're not coming from the attitude of upper funnel, and they're not a TV expert. So there's an opportunity there I see as YouTube and other streaming services continue to expand and really dominate what's going to be probably the biggest growth area from a marketing perspective, is for an agency to come in and say, hey, we're the YouTube experts. You shouldn't have search people buying YouTube because they're not going to understand it. It's fundamentally a different animal. Yes, you access it that way, but you need to have a specialist actually buying it for you.
Right. Well, it makes perfect sense. And YouTube is just stirring up the world. It's interesting. One of the things that comes to mind when you were talking about that is Lindsay Sterling. She decided to create her own. She created her own record just from her following, right? And had the ability to set her own terms on all of that. I don't know her full story on that, but she started off with a YouTube channel. She didn't go and give away rights to everything. And it's really exciting, all the companies that are able to come out through this world, building the groundswell and going from the ground up. And it's a really amazing time where the barriers are just not there like they did before, like they were before.
Yeah, there's no barriers there for most businesses. I mean, I was talking with my wife the other day, and we were reminded that it wasn't that long ago that in order to go see properties and look at a home, you had to go talk to a real estate agent, and they were the only ones that had access to the MLS system, and they wouldn't let you look at it. Legally, you weren't allowed to look at it. It was all private and copywritten and everything like that. So think about it. Now we can just go online and just view homes, and most younger people today think that's the way it always was. Wasn't always that way. And just like what you said, in the music business and in the entertainment industry, the barrier was you had to get on the radio, you had to get on TV or get into movies, and there were so many barriers in the way. Those are all gone now. So it's everything's been open, and it just shows how much and how quickly things change.
Well, you know what? It's exciting, really, when you think about the changes that are happening. That a lot of it were political, because the legislation that was put in place to be able to protect these different industries, and a lot of that's going down. That brings a lot of hope for me. I think when we're looking at, you can look at the world, and some could argue that there are many things that are happening that they're not happy about, and it doesn't matter. Like, both sides, you're gonna find things that you're not gonna be happy about, right? But there are so many good things also, and what we're talking about is one of these examples that, like, there really has never been the opportunity like there is now. It comes with a whole new layer that there's an enormous amount of competition like there has never been before, and that's why, to your point earlier, how important it is to differentiate your services and your products and everything that you're doing, so that you actually can stand out and you could be successful in any market.
No, you're absolutely right, because as an agency, you're now competing not against every agency in the US, you're competing against every possible marketer in the world. We have a client, and their number one marketer, he lives in Pakistan. He's been with them for a number of years. He's leading up, tens of millions of dollars worth of marketing spend because he's great. And the CMO found the best person that they could, and he happens to be in Pakistan, which is fantastic. So you're now in competition with everyone else in the world, and you're absolutely right. The way you win is you need to differentiate yourself by being an expert in the area that you want to serve.
Yeah, I love it. So Jeff, how can people find you?
Best place to find me is right here on LinkedIn. Or you can also go to check out our website on Provalytics.com. Best way to get there is to go to GetProva. That's GetProva.com. Prova means proof in Italian. So it's all about getting proof and proving that what you're doing is working. That's what we do.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for being here, Jeff. I loved this conversation, and look forward to many more. Thanks again for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks, Mandi.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Hands Off CEO with Mandi Ellefson. If you want to work less and make more, make sure you subscribe and get a new episode every week, and help spread the word by leaving a review.